Number 2, we have to learn a new language. Don't worry, it could be English. The left, where they say, I'm fed up with corporate welfare. You know what that means to us? We're tired of the bailouts. It's the same thing. And number 3 is the common ground we have to find to speak their language. Very important. So let us begin with Loren as we touch base with the awakening.
Thank you. You could flip over. Flip over the video.
I excited too much.
Now we need to flip over to the video over here.
I'll get one.
Okay. All right. How many of you right now would say that you are dissatisfied with your government? Please raise your hand. Well, today we are going to talk to you, and boy, that's a tough act to follow. No. Today we're going to talk to you about reforming the federal government by unleashing the Constitution's greatest power. Hopefully the... Ignition. We are going to talk to you about reforming the federal government by unleashing the Constitution's greatest power. This was the one mechanism by which our founding fathers got the states to support the new Constitution. The states wanted to know, as those that fought the Revolutionary War and bled and died for their liberty, that they were not going to just simply ratify a new Constitution, a new government into being, that they couldn't ultimately reign back if that government were ever to become irresponsible or tyrannical. A mechanism that's been in our Constitution for over 200 years that we have never used. Now, the awakening for me, because why would we as a people be driven to use a mechanism that our founding fathers only thought of as for the worst case scenario? Well, the awakening for me personally was in 2006 when Nancy Pelosi came into power in Congress and the Democrats took back the House. And I thought there and I said, how is it that we could possibly, how is it that our nation, the voters of this country, how could they possibly be making such bad choices? It just didn't make any sense to me. Well, that was the moment that I realized, with the Democrats taking control of the House, it was almost as though there were a ripple in the force. It was something I couldn't quite put my hands on, but I realized that the honest majority in Congress had vanished, compromising the very foundations of representative democracy. Our founding fathers predicated representative democracy on the trust between the representatives and those whom they represent. If trust is compromised, so is representative democracy. If we can't trust those whom we send to office, how are we supposed to trust our form of government? Now, of course, there are those who are fighting the good fight. Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, my personal hero. You have these dynamic individuals that give us hope that there is something that we can do. The problem is they're vastly outnumbered. The federal government at this time, in my opinion, has been compromised. And the states, as those that originally established the federal government, need to bypass it and reform it using a mechanism our founding fathers gave us. Now again, why is it that we're making such bad mistakes? Your average American's in the middle. Typically they sway back and forth from right to left. It is a matter of education. Our public schools are not teaching the knowledge of our founding fathers. And so 8 years ago, I realized that something had to be done. I'm just a regular Joe. I thought, what could I do? Well, I could write a book. And that's why I wrote The Sword of Liberty. It's an action-adventure novel that chronicles the knowledge of our founding fathers and one man's fight to reform our government using a long-lost constitutional mechanism. The reason why I wrote it as an action-adventure novel is because I thought, the people who most need to hear this message are probably the last people that are going to pick up a book by Mark Levin. You're talking about middle America, you're talking young males, probably ages 20 through 40. You're not talking about people who are involved in the political process. So how could I get through to them? How could I re-reveal the knowledge of our founding fathers? Illuminate the American mind with the knowledge that we need to take back our country. And I thought, what better way than to write an entertaining novel? And by the way, I do have those books for sale in the back. I couldn't pass that one up. Now, what is it that we can do from here? Well, the first thing we have to do is identify the problem. Why is it that it seems, I mean, you guys just went through a very scary presentation from Bill Fruth. How is it that it could get this bad? Do you think our founding fathers intended for the states to be this helpless, for us to be this helpless, that the federal government could just seemingly do whatever it wants without any recourse on the part of the people or the states? Well, no. That's not how our founding fathers intended our government to run, and that's not how they established the Constitution. In fact, what happened 100 years ago is what created the problem. And that's because the people of that time thought that they were smarter than our founding fathers. And it was the 17th Amendment that took states' rights and packed them off to Washington, D.C. You may recall that originally, senators were appointed by the state legislatures. Now that in and of itself may not show you exactly why we've lost power. But when you think about that, that essentially gives the states almost full control over one body of Congress, an extremely powerful influence in our government. You think about it. If the people of a certain state go to their state legislators and they say, look, we want this dealt with at the national level, the state legislators then turn around, send a directive to their 2 senators in D.C. and say, hey, look, we want this issue dealt with this way. So you need to vote left or right, however you want to do that. Well, if that senator had half a brain, that senator is going to listen to the advice and counsel that comes from the state. 6 years later, they're going to have to be reappointed. Now, of course, someone has to have free will. Maybe there's a few mavericks here and there. But overall, that senator had better listen to the desires of the state legislature. Otherwise, that person will just simply be yanked out and someone will be reappointed in their place. Well, the 17th Amendment, of course, made the election of senators a popular vote. And that's where the states lost their strongest influence in government. Now, that doesn't mean that the states don't have any influence in government. They do through Article 5, but it's a much more difficult process. And obviously we will get to discussing that.